So Peter's letters to was written to like all the Christians scattered around the then known world, and the world at the time was under Roman rule, under the emperor or governor Nero, who was actually really wicked, and the Christians were being very heavily persecuted by him, and his rule was so wicked that Peter called it Babylon, and I'll call it Babylon 2.0. So it was that bad. Remember how the exile was for the Old Testament Jews. So the churches were experiencing serious persecution, and his letter was written as a way to encourage them. It contained words of encouragement, comfort, and hope. One major lesson for me was from this whole book was about going through trials as a Christian. Now, I understood from this letter that trials don't mean that one has been rejected or forgotten, that God hasn't abandoned us because we go through trials. It could actually be a means of purification, and trials actually strengthen our faith in God. I mean, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a few weeks ago, and we're talking about, because she was going through like a difficult time. And I was like, do you know what? It's very easy for us as Christians to just think that every time that we go through something bad, we're out of God's will, or we're suffering because of something we did, or so, or the enemy is after us and stuff like that. But then we think about the likes of Paul, Peter, and all these Old Testament or these New Testament apostles, and like trials and suffering was their bread and butter, and they were right there in the center of God's will. So that was one major lesson for me. Now, as God's own people, I understood from this letter that the Israelites had a higher calling as a royal priesthood, as it says in chapter 2, verse 5 and 6, I think. No, verse 5 and verse 9. And but in these verses, Peter is actually talking to us Gentiles and letting us know that we are included in this royal priesthood. Every believer is part of this royal priesthood, with Christ as our high priest and mediator. Now, the call to submit to authority in chapter 2, verses 13 to 25 must have been very hard for the Christians. Imagine being asked to submit to the authority of Nero that was persecuting, killing, and just making their lives a living hell. But the call was to be mindful of God and to endure the hard situations that they faced in light of that. And the lesson basically I wrote for myself: in your suffering, remember God, and He will empower you to endure and display His glory in your life and strengthen your soul. So I noticed also a common theme in Paul's letters, like the letters that we've written. So a common theme between Peter and Paul's letters, and in chapter 3, when he addressed the issues of marriage between husbands and wives, very similar to Paul's, right? So regarding the wives, the primary focus and what Peter was pointing out to was the heart posture, and not necessarily just, the attitude, when he described what wives should be like. To me, there's nothing wrong with being presentable, looking nice, braiding your hair, smelling nice, and all of that. I think that was just in context what it was that he was speaking, more to the heart posture. Now, the phrase, the weaker vessel, when he says, oh, you are the weaker, it used to bother me a lot, I won't lie. But now, learning from the people at the Bible Recap, or the person entirely, Kobo, shout out to you, is that I found out that the word there, and first of all, I've always heard this thing quoted out of context, and I just learned that the original word for that weaker vessel translates into something like porcelain, right? Now, you see, that makes sense. Porcelain obviously is fragile, so I thought about it in this way, that we women are like fine china, right? So we're supposed to be treated with care, and men are called to look out for us, treat us well, and treasure us because we're valuable. Now, that is a weaker vessel that I can get on board with. Let me share with you the lessons I learned about God. Suffering for Christians, like I said before, isn't a sign that God has forgotten or rejected us. As believers in Jesus Christ, suffering offers us an opportunity to display His character and grace. He has called us to his eternal glory, and though we live in a very corrupt and fallen world, it is only for a time that we will be subject to this suffering. It will not be forever. So if you are going through a time of suffering or going through a time of trial, know that there's an expiratory date. In 5:10, it says, "And the God of all grace, who called you to eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." Now that is a promise and a hope worth holding on to. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you being with me on this journey because, like I said, you keep me accountable. Look forward to sharing, excuse me, with you tomorrow from the book of Hebrews. And God willing, I'll see you here. Have a wonderful day.